self-driving vehicles come on stream more rapidly than is currently considered, which would have potentially a huge labour market shock effect. And the very final point here is that public acceptance, public understanding of these technologies is really critical. There's a great deal of apprehension around automation at the moment, and not unduly so. There's many people who've already, their life circumstances have been impacted in significant ways by the success of automation. We see how public attitudes have shaped regulation on, for instance, nuclear power, on genetically modified organisms, sometimes in the face of compelling scientific evidence. And might this happen with artificial intelligence, with robots, with other developments? Well, there's things that governments need to do here. They need to have detailed exchanges with the public, communicate sources of uncertainty, avoid hype, and actually allocate resources to studying better the socioeconomic impacts of a range of new technologies. It was interesting when the human genome was decoded. As part of the Human Genome Project, the sponsors of the project had the foresight to obviously realize that this genetics technology was going to have huge ethical and social implications, and they allocated part of the research budget to study those implications. So I could go on. The book is 400 pages, but the night is not that long. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll take a couple of questions, give me a chance to let that sink in. And yeah, there was a second question?
Yes, do you think that it's possible to create more jobs in the face of technology?
Yeah. Okay, so the first question had to do with whether the orientation of the Trump administration towards less regulation would have an impact on productivity. Is that correct?
Yeah. You spoke about investment as being very important.
Yes. Yes.
And deregulation as being helpful. I think we're seeing less investment and less regulation, so they say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very complex question because the range of regulations which we're talking about with these technologies, the range of regulations are very many, and it's sort of a moving target. Now, I put up a graphic there which looked at differences across countries in the ability of firms which are patenting to access external finance. And that is a function of a series of regulations, some of which are very important. It's not that you have no regulation, it's that you need smart regulation. And there are areas of technological development which will require new regulations. So we will need regulations around artificial intelligence in a variety of ways. You know, just as we don't want, and we need to regulate the ability of people to misuse gene editing technologies, we also don't want artificial intelligence to be used in ways which could be harmful. You know, we're already seeing the way that, you know, lack of algorithmic transparency in some areas that AI can work in socially prejudicial ways. So there's many fields where regulation is really essential, and I think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis because the different technologies raise different issues. There is a need for more. I would differentiate between just investment in terms of like business investment. So I put up the example with the use of the electric dynamo and how it was, especially in sectors where the startup rate was fast, that these new technologies were introduced, quickly. But all of this came on the back as well of an upswing in business investment in capital in the 1920s. And really, we've had a lot of companies in the developed world who've been sitting on mountains of profit for a long time and not investing in R&D or in new vintages of capital. And we need to make sure, fortunately, the world is in this happy position right now of a sort of synchronized upswing in the global economy, and we're hoping that that will, in its wake and as part of that process, involve massive new plant and so higher productivity in production. But there's also this question, which I pointed to, of investment in terms of public investment in research and development. The ability to, so that R&D is so critical in terms of generating new ideas, and it's critical for so many reasons. One, because we know that like knowledge is and innovation is the foundation of productivity growth in the long term, but also there's evidence that it's becoming ever more difficult to find good ideas. So the low-hanging fruits of knowledge have been picked in many ways. So we think about Moore's law and the sort of exponential increase over time in the number of, in a whole range of indicators in the digital realm. To keep Moore's law running requires 18 times more scientists today than it did in the 1970s. It's just getting ever harder to eke out that next increment in productivity increase. So that's another reason why these declining trends in public spending on R&D are worrisome. So maybe, and then there was the question about jobs. The evidence historically is really very positive over technology shocks. That in the aggregate, yes, it's true that in some firms a technology shock will lead to labour shedding, but it doesn't have to be so. It depends on the price elasticity of demand, how much by being able to lower prices as a consequence of more productivity. It depends on how much consumers will respond to the lower price of the output. They could respond by a higher percentage than the decrease in price of the product and actually mean that they're buying more volume of that product overall, if they're very price sensitive, and that can lead to an even increase in the number of workers. Even though the number of workers required to produce each unit of output will fall, it could be that there's so much more output which is purchased for the individual firm that the total number of workers employed in production can rise. So the effect at the level of a firm of a technological shock, of a new technology, can actually go any way. It can be increasing employment, it can be declining employment, or static levels of total numbers of workers in the plant. The evidence in the aggregate, across cities, across industries, across countries, is that employment shocks is that technological shocks are generally good for the labour market overall. You see the whole history of the 20th century has been one of technological evolution, and the US has added 70 million jobs or so during that period, nearly at full employment today. In the US, where so much of this technology, especially the digital technology, is being deployed. Now, for the longer term, and just to recap, that aggregate effect is generally positive for a number of reasons. One, because the technological shock is like a gift to the economy in a way, because it can raise the real wages of workers. In different countries, it will raise the real wages of workers to different extents, depending on the particular institutional arrangements, say the strength of unions and so on, that vary from one country to another. It can also increase the profits of the owners of the firm, of the owners of capital. Those profits eventually go back, they go into savings and get reinvested, generate new jobs. Not immediately, that whole process may take a long time. And or, in addition to these impacts, you can also lower prices for consumers. If you lower prices for consumers, that means that they have more in their pocket to spend on other things, which also generates jobs. So this aggregate picture through these different channels is generally positive. Now, of course, the big question today is inequality. its distribution. The economy is growing, but there's been a lot of people, particularly in the kind of the middle segment of the labor market. So people doing routine, relatively routine jobs, simple tasks which can easily be depicted in code, codified, the routinizable tasks, and therefore they can more easily be substituted for by machines and software. And we see for these people, in most of the developed world, their circumstances has been increasingly difficult over the last few decades, and that there has been, in fact, employment polarization towards the upper and lower ends of the skills spectrum and of the routinizability spectrum of work. What this really means for the long term is very hard. It's very hard to say, and I do actually think that there's an American futurist, Amir, I think his name was, who had this phrase which became a sort of dictum in the field, which was that for any particular technology, we tend to overestimate its impacts in the short run and underestimate the impacts in the long run. And I do think that with AI, and with, as I mentioned, these sort of like those softwares which can observe micro-expressions and understand better than human observers a range of emotions that we are feeling, and that's just one of the many kind of competencies which AI is gaining. I feel that there'll be many segments of the workforce which face real challenges in the coming, not in the next few years, but over the next few decades. Our societies will have to grapple with some really serious challenges and have to rethink the whole nature, I think, of the welfare state.
We just had a question come through from our Facebook audience. The question is, how can laggards in data-driven decision-making make a considerable improvement in their organizations, considering a restricted budget for investing in expensive projects?
Yes. That's an interesting firm-level question. I've seen some work recently which has been looking at what are the factors which drive the adoption of artificial intelligence across firms. So can we identify some differentiating factors? And one of the key issues which comes out of always is skills. And it's not just that those persons, say, with machine learning competencies are better able to use the technology. And remember, much of this artificial intelligence is available already for free. It's available open source. And so if you know how to use the technology, you don't have to create it. It's a diffusion challenge, again, for many types of AI. And so the issue is that those who have, say, machine learning competencies, it's not just they know how to use the technology, but this research shows that they are the ones that are better placed to conceive of new ways of utilizing the technology, new business models. So, for example, how can we make some of our business processes more